Hello everyone. I'm going to show you my process for building a book box, which is my second one for this channel. And this one is on Otto of the Silver Hand by Howard Pyle. It was written in the late 19th century, and Howard Pyle was an artist at that time, and he illustrated his own book. And he wrote many books, actually, and illustrated them. He was quite an artist, very well known. He was also a professor of art as well. And what I'm doing is I'm just putting in the flooring for the illustration that I chose, which is the last illustration in his book, where Otto is actually asking the little girl he meets in the book earlier on, after he was terribly harmed by someone who kidnapped him. His hand was cut off, his right hand, so that he wouldn't grow up to be able to use a sword and come back and revenge himself on his father's killer. And it's actually a children's story. It has some grim things in it, but it's a great adventure story and has a lot of wonderful scenes in it. And what I'm doing is I'm doing something called forced perspective, and I've done this before, but I took a different approach in this box than the first one I did for this channel, which was Mr. Todd, The Tale of Mr. Todd by Beatrix Potter. And I'm using a air dry clay here to build the scene. And I'm just bringing the wall up a little bit, and then I'll let that dry and I'll carve it down. And I put a piece of balsa wood in over the foam on the flooring. And so I'm just going around and scraping up the bits and pieces that don't belong there. Now, this is not a how-to video. And I stated in my bio that my films are not necessarily how-to. Most of what I do is a process, and I'm showing the process. And of course, if you watch it, you'll learn some things, I'm sure. But I'm rather new to the miniature world of 1/12 and smaller, so I don't really feel qualified to make how-to videos per se yet, since it is a learning process for me. And here I'm just going over the flooring and just using some tools for sculpting. And I'm using my palette knife to incise the place where the floor divides. And I'm just showing quickly some of the materials that I use. And I mix my own paints. I'm using a gel to thin it out, and I'll go over this several times. All of his pictures were in black and white. I did colorize a picture for this just as a guide so that I could make the costumes for the characters. I had 2 dolls that were 1/12 size, and I had them in storage for a long time. I didn't know what to do with them. And I was going to try to sculpt the dolls, and I have made dolls in the past, quite a few as a matter of fact. But I decided to use these dolls because I had them and they were the right size. And they could fit the character with a little bit of work on them, repainting them and making costumes for them. I'm using acrylic paints for this. I'm not using oils. I was very tempted to use oil paint, but the dry time on oils, the kind that I use, is quite a long time. And this I started a couple of months ago already. And I had something like 14 hours of film, so that's why this is speeded up so much. And I did cut some of it out as well. I'm using apple barrel cream-colored paint for the walls, which is a very inexpensive acrylic paint, but it's a good paint. Most of the paints are a mixture of colors and brands, such as Golden, Apple Barrel, and Winsor & Newton, and a couple of others. I'm trying to stick to the image as closely as possible and getting the feel of the last scene of the book by including everything I can and sort of honoring Howard Pyle's illustrations. I'm just using jump rings here to build the windows, and I'm just gluing them on a piece of plastic, clear plastic. And I'll have to cut some of them in half in order to fit them all in. Now this might look a little wonky, but it works in the end, so be patient. And here's just cutting them in half now and placing them. And I'm going to make the bench. And I'm cutting out the picture directly from the illustration that I measured out over the actual illustration and making the supports out of foam core. I'm not using much music in this. I had a complaint from someone who wasn't very nice about it, saying that the music that I used made them extremely nervous and it angered them or something to that effect. But I take criticism very seriously, so I thought, well, I'll make some videos where I don't incorporate much music and see how that goes. We certainly don't want people to be irritated. That's not my intention. I love music, though, and I love videos with music. I think it helps the creative process. But we'll take the criticism seriously and see how it goes. And maybe it will be better, and maybe not. She also, the same person, also complained that I didn't have enough of a how-to with my last video. But my videos are not about how-to necessarily. And I do say that in my bio. I'm more interested in the process. And if you can learn something from watching my process, hey, that's great. And when I am more experienced with miniatures, I may make some how-tos as well. But for now, it's the process I'm concerned about. I'm just putting some more paint in, and this will all get touched up at another date. And I'll put some more paint around the window too for perspective. Now that the background is pretty dry for underneath the window, I'm going to go ahead and paint the balsa wood frame that will be placed inside the box. And I'll paint it with perspective in mind as well. And I did put some clear gloss gel on the jump rings that are making up the window. And it dries very shiny, so it would look like glass. And that's the gel I used for the first window. And I found that it was pretty good, but it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. So I went ahead and put a super gloss golden glaze on the other windows over what was there, just to make them a little shinier. And that's it right there. And I just painted it in, and it dries perfectly clear and very shiny, and it looked better. And now I have the background glued in, And I'm gluing that right into the box. And now I'll put in the shadowing around the window. I'm just using a little bit of brown and black paint mixed together for a more gray look. And there's the window that's open. It's leaning against the wall. Now I'm making the garment for the male figure, and I sewed it by hand, and I cut out the scalloping on the bottom. And I'm just tightening it up a bit. I have a large seam in the back, and I needed to make it very strong because I will be pulling this down and gluing it to look like it's draped. But you won't see that back seam when it's done. And here's the chrome marker that I'm using for the hand, and it's silver, and it really makes a nice shiny silver hand. And that's why he's called Otto of the Silver Hand. I highly recommend the book. It's free, I think, on Amazon, or nearly free if you're a Prime member. There's a lot of different versions out there. Same story, same illustrations, but by different companies that have put it out. And some are better than others. The illustrations are wonderful. Now I'm going to paint the hair, which comes right off. And first I'm going to put his belt in. I didn't sew all these little trims on because it would just take too long. And the glue works great if you're careful. And just putting gold trim around to close up the seams. I repainted his face, and I think I mentioned it before, I only repainted half of it. So the half you see is where his eye is closed, and that's okay because you won't see the other side. And once these figures are in the box, they're not coming out. I probably said that before, but I can't remember. This is kind of a long video for me, so if I repeat myself, I'm sorry. And this trim is kind of stiff. Now my sound might change a little bit. I actually had to switch seats and go to the other side of the room. And I don't have a soundproof room to do these recordings, so the sound can be rather uneven depending on where I am in the room. Okay, I'm painting his hair now, and his hair is an ochre yellow color. And the way it was described in the book was this a blonde type of hair. So there he is, his leather purse that I made earlier. And the leather purse is made from an old glove. And I use the old glove in other places too. And it's just trimmed with nylon cord. And then there's a chain braid hanging from the side. Okay, now I'm going to make his shoes, and the shoes are made from silicone and cornstarch, and it's a silicone caulk. And I only put as much as I think I'm going to need in the container. So estimate how much you need for a pair of shoes. I'm going to make 2 pairs. I put a little bit of that paint in there to give it some color, although I will end up painting these shoes later. But this at least will be a background color for them. And you knead it sort of like bread. As soon as it's not sticky, then you've had enough cornstarch. And it's sort of the way that bread feels after you've kneaded it quite a while without it being sticky. I'm putting a little Vaseline on his feet because I will pull these off after. This stuff actually is just like very hard rubber when it dries. But it can take a very long time to dry depending on how much pigment you put in it, if you put other than a dry pigment in. And this actually took 3 weeks for these shoes to completely dry. And I'm going to make her shoes as well. I'm not going to worry as much about the shape at this point. I will smooth some more of this stuff over later when I'm satisfied with the way they look. I started out with very pointy shoes, and then when I looked at the picture I realized that the shoes were not pointy. They were more rounded at the end, the tips. So now I'm making the dagger, and I've coated a toothpick with some of that leather that I made the purse out of, and I just used super glue to glue it onto the toothpick. And this is epoxy sculpt for making the rest of it. And I'm trying to stick to the illustration. And I'm making the hilt of the dagger as well out of epoxy sculpt. And when this hardens, then I will paint it with the chrome marker in gold. And I'll put some jewels on the ends of the little pointed things hanging down. And this is the broadsword. You can just see it in that picture there, just a little bit of it at the end and the top. So I'm not taking a great deal of detail, time for details rather, to make this sword, because you're not going to see much of it. But what shows I want to look, realistic. So I'm making it out of actually a coffee stir stick, a hard one, really tough one that I found in the batch. And that's epoxy sculpt on the hilt and on the end. And when that hardens, that will also be painted gold and embellished with some jewels. Those were actually pretty easy to make. And now it's hardened, cured, and I'm just using that gold chrome marker. These gold and silver and copper colored chrome markers are they're really good. I really like the way that they work. Now these are fingernail decorative jewels for fingernail art, which I obviously am not into. But what I'm going to do is use them to decorate the swords and also the clothing on the characters and a couple other places. So I'm going to put them on with some super glue. They're really nice. They come in different shapes and colors. I got them on Amazon. I think they were like $5 for the whole bunch of them, which isn't too bad. I don't know what that works out to be in English pounds. It's probably a bit more. I'm not sure where our dollar is with the English pound right now, but okay. A little bead there. They're not beads actually, they're little jewels. And his shoes are not quite cured at this point. And I did break an end of a toe off. You'll see that. But I fixed it. It wasn't hard to fix. I'm just going to put some of these jewels around the cuffs and around the neck and around the belt and on the front part of his outfit. A few there. I did find these a little difficult to sort through. They didn't come separated. They all just came in one big bag, which was the only drawback for these. But the price was right, so I did have to spend some time sorting through them to get the right shapes and colors. And I'm just using super glue to put them on. This is the Ultra Control Gel super glue, which is my favorite super glue. It's not runny. Okay, there's a little bit of a close-up of his hand and the pouch. And that's nylon cord around the pouch, and a gold chain that's in the picture. Well, I'm assuming it was gold. And that's just a crocheted piece of gold embroidery thread to make it look like a chain. Now I'm making the female figure's dress, and this is the same pattern I used for his, which is an actual medieval pattern for a tunic. And so I'm going to make her dress out of the same pattern. It's going to look different. This is silk. I had a nice piece of silk left over from another doll dress that I had made for a Barbie doll. And I'm using taxidermy pins, which I use with silk and fine fabrics because they're so thin they don't pierce the fabric with holes. That can be seen. So I'll just cut it around. I'm hand sewing these clothes, the seams, the main seams, but then I'm not hemming the cuffs or the bottom part where you see the end there, the bottom, the hem seam at the bottom rather. I'm just going to go over all of the seams so with fray check so it doesn't ravel and get all fray. Is that a word, fray? No. And that takes a few minutes to dry. But it does a good job. And then I can just, around the edges that I'm not going to hem, I can put trim, and that'll work out just fine. And around the neck too. That's going to be the front part. She has a two-piece dress at gold mesh. Now I've painted his shoes and his stockings on, and I'm just putting that red cord around the top of his shoes to finish them off. Now her headpiece, this was just a kind of gold roping that I glued on and glued it right to her head. And I used super glue. And I also put that same red cording around her outfit to finish it off. And these are just some more of those little gems that I'm putting on the headdress. And this was actually not that easy to make. It was a bit of a struggle, but I think it turned out okay, and I certainly didn't want to leave it off. And I also made her braids longer with some black wool yarn, and then finished off her braids with some gold cording. And I'll have to trim off some of the extra little hairs that have escaped. And I'm just going around and putting them on just about her whole head. Okay, and I'll finish putting more jewels on his outfit. I'm putting some green and blue ones in place around the red ones I put on previously, just to give it a little more richness. And pick up some of those blues in the front of his outfit and also his hosiery. And I'm putting some jewels on the little background image in the back, which is, I think, was a crucifix, and so I'm just decorating it a little bit. I put a little bit of gold chrome marker on it as well, just a little brush here and there. And I'll have some more touch-up work to do in this before I fix the figures in. And I also have to make the book cover, so I don't want to glue them in until the book cover is done. I'm going to be using leather to cover the book, and then I'll put a title page on the inside. And I will be doing some embellishing on the outside to make it look like a medieval book. And there's that. It's almost finished on the inside. But there's still quite a bit of work to be done, and that's why there'll be a part 2. I'll just place these guys in there so you can kind of see what it looks like. There's the building, and I put a mirror at the top so that it would carry the look of the windows up through the ceiling. And when you look at it straight on, it gives that illusion. I made these pillows. One's wool, one's velvet. Trim them. She sits on pillows, and she's posed in a certain way. He's kissing her hand, so I will have to pose that very carefully to make sure her dress shows the way it shows in the drawing. And there's her braids. They need to be trimmed around a little bit. There's my hero and his hosed legs and shoes. And he'll be bent over her hand, kissing it. And he has a hat in his hand as well. The dagger goes in front and hangs from his belt in the front, and the broadsword hangs from the back. So that's pretty much where they'll be positioned. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Bye-bye.